Hey everybody, welcome to the Innovation Coffee Break. I'm Bob Birch, filling in for Becky today. She had another meeting that came up. The last couple of Innovation Coffee Breaks, starting last month, have been focused on the 2018-2019 innovation grants that NDSU Extension Program leaders provided. And we've had some of those programs that were funded by those grants reporting out on their activities. Last week we heard from Carrie Johnson, Nikki Johnson, and Stacy Wang about adulting, from a group from 4-H about 4-H marketing videos, and from Kim Bouchard about the Parent and Family Resource Center's marketing. Today we've got David Ripplinger here to talk about data visualization in his project, and Julie Garden-Robinson here as well to talk a little bit later about her project. But why don't we go ahead and get started. As you go through, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. We can turn on microphones too, maybe when there's space to do that. But to start off, I'll just introduce David here and have him tell you a little bit about his innovation grant project.
Great, thanks, Bob.
Yep.
Yeah, I've actually got two of them. I was privileged to get grants for two small projects. One that was actually in the works when the opportunity was announced, and another one that came about, something that was kind of burning in the back of my mind, and the opportunity to have some support to do some work kind of push it over the top. So just to dive into the first one, entitled Powering the Red River Valley. And the gist of it is we actually held an event at the Fargo Theater to engage the community and kind of start a discussion on energy and the energy transition that we're undergoing. A little bit different than things we've done traditionally within NDSU Extension. And a lot of it was motivated by my interaction with my peers across the country. Extension energy is very diverse in the communities we serve and the needs that we try to meet. And I've learned a lot over the last 5-10 years that I've been in this position about those differences, and been really intrigued and kind of challenged by the program that I provide at NDSU. Obviously, I have a specific focus, and it's really me and a little bit of Ken Hellevang's time that are really doing most of the extension economics work. But again, I kept interacting with my peers across the country, and then specifically at the University of Minnesota, learning about what they're doing. And, the thing that kind of put it over the top is that I was a meeting hosted by CERTS, which is the Clean Energy Resource Teams group, which is part of the University of Minnesota Extension. They have a biannual meeting. They held it in St. Cloud in 2018, and I just got really, really excited. Just seeing how they were actually able to have some very, very productive discussions, being able to contribute, to provide, to bring science into these conversations regarding energy, from a household standpoint, from a business standpoint, from a community standpoint. And they have a really fantastic group. And I thought, gosh, this be I learned a lot from them. I want to do something in North Dakota. And I kind of bounced off the ideas like, well, maybe there's something we could do together. I don't have the breadth, just being an individual to do a lot of things, but together we can. CERTS has a staff of about a dozen working a lot of different areas. And so we kind of started this conversation. And what we actually decided to do was kind of a lighter lift, in kind of building on some things that CERTS have been doing in the state of Minnesota. And that was to host a series of community discussions on energy, which really provided the model for what we did in Fargo. Fargo was clearly the biggest event, the highest profile event. But beginning in the summer of 2018, they had begun having about every month a conversation with communities driven by a film. And again, the idea is you watch the film, have some discussion, and see how things went. When this kind of came up, it's like, yeah, we can do this. Should we have it in Fargo? Should we have it in Moorhead? It's like, well, let's have it on the Fargo side. They had some funding available. Really fortunate. I don't have them recognized here, but the McKnight Foundation underwrote a lot of their costs for this program. And so we decided to have it at Fargo Theater. And it was about the same time. It's like, hey, there's this innovation grant that can help us kind of doll this up, maybe do some more marketing, keep it kind of higher profile. And just to talk about the evening, we did market it pretty heavily. I was kind of impressed. I was driving to work and listening to Minnesota Public Radio, and they were talking about it. Got some some TV time. But, you know, in terms of the evening, the real goal is to get to the discussion, but to motivate that, we did have a networking period. A lot of the folks who were involved in energy and environmental activities here in the city that I'm familiar with, they were all there. They brought a lot of their friends and family and colleagues to have part of that discussion. So we did kind of take full advantage of the social hour, had really nice appetizers. You know, it is important in extension to make sure you cover that base. Catered by Concordia College, who did a great job. Then we segue into the film screening community discussion. We actually did something a little bit different being in Fargo. We actually had 4 speakers from the community talk about the projects they're working on or things that they've done, including a faculty member at NDSU who had led an energy efficiency program in the city, which was very, very impactful. Concordia College, the city of Moorhead, and another community speaker. And then we segued into what's the traditional framework, which is be watching this 20-minute video. It's called The Power of Minnesota, which really talked about new energy and making this transition to whatever comes next. Again, not really trying to push anything, but, you know, providing context and perspective of, you know, what really is happening, you know, across the country as energy prices change, as things get more or less expensive, you know, kind of across the board. Then we segued into discussion. We broke into little groups, had them answer some questions, reported back to the group. Myself and Alyssa Paulish, who's the head of certs, managed that from the front. About an hour and a half later, we were done. And then it was kind of like, well, that was great. We got some really good feedback. We documented that. It's like, well, what do we do next? And we did have a follow-up event I'll talk about in a second. You know, and just in terms of kind of lessons learned, one of the secondary things I did in all of this is a non-traditional project for NDSU Extension, you know, because it is a different audience, a slightly different topic, and a different purpose. And I did kind of want to do, and I'm not going to present the results here, but, you know, I did conduct an evaluation after the event. It was really looking more at the experience and the perception of extension before and afterwards, and what this meant to the people who participated. And really, most folks who were familiar with extension, we were held in high regard. The program itself clicked it up a notch. They thought it was worthwhile. And so that was helpful. Kind of, again, as we're, you know, this is kind of just working into that space and to see what we might want to do. In terms of some general lessons learned, things that we know, right? Delivering programs, if you have a comfortable space, a good environment, it's very helpful. To have food is helpful. And probably, you know, the best thing in all of this is that it was really light lifting between NDSU Extension and certs. You know, I ended up being the local person. They have a lot of capacity down in the Twin Cities, and so it was really easy to do. They had the template. We also worked with Prairie Public Television. They actually aired the film later that month. And so it made it a lot more fun, and I think a lot more easy to do. In terms of the program itself, you know, I really did think that, you know, delving into this and kind of doing something non-traditional and working with non-traditional audience, especially given the feedback, did make it worthwhile. I think one of the challenges we have, you know, in doing this is energy's a really big topic. There's a lot of folks who live in Cass County and urban areas of Cass County. And so while we kind of stepped into this, you know, we couldn't have a sustaining effort within it, but I still thought it was worthwhile. And the last thing I'll bring up is this idea of having a film viewing and discussion. The film that we watched, and I'd be happy to share a link to the video with you, was very, very well done. I mean, it was a high quality film that was commissioned, and it was commissioned with the exact purpose of, you know, of introducing or educating folks on kind of where we're at to promote that discussion. But I thought it was really impactful and really kind of set the stage for that discussion. And I've actually been in conversations with others about using the same model across the state. As you know, there's a lot of things going on in agriculture, going on in rural communities, and to use this type of framework to guide that interaction. And you know, we do have more involvement with community leadership, with community function, more on the rural side than we do on the urban side. But I just thought it was a really fantastic way of doing it. And again, especially since the film had already been paid for, it was quite easy to do. We had to rent the theater, we had to pay for some food, but in terms of getting folks there and having everything else, it was low cost but impactful. So I thought it was worthwhile. Now the kind of question is, what else do we do in urban extension, in energy extension? We do now have an urban extension agent, and Kayla's great, but she has, essentially almost any and all of the things you might want to do in extension as broad as we are, for her to kind of find that way. We visited and talked and done a little bit of work on energy, but obviously that's shouldn't be and isn't going to be her number one interest, just like urban extension is not going to be my number one focus anytime soon. We did have a follow-up event. We actually, the cost of the Fargo Theater event came in considerably under budget because we had partners. We decided that we can use some of the residual funds to have another event. And so in May of last year, we had a electric vehicle event in Moorhead. This time we thought we were on Fargo, in Fargo in North Dakota the first time. Hey, let's go over to Moorhead. Had a really fantastic afternoon talking about electric vehicles and what they mean to certain stakeholders, not to consumers and vehicle owners, individual vehicle owners, but rather to utilities and governments and fleet owners, knowing that this is kind of on the horizon for a lot of folks. And that ended up being another really non-traditional, fun event. I think we had about 150 people at that event. So that's kind of the Powering the Red River Valley project we had. Next one, taking a little bit longer than I thought. This visualizing the impact of extension. It was September of 2018. I gave a short innovation coffee break talk about visualization, data visualization, which is a really hot topic in business primarily. And really what it's looking at is how do we, you visualize data, how do we create graphics that can communicate well, or how do we kind of change the way in which we as humans interact with data. And it's really kind of, as I said, really having a big impact in business. It's a very, very popular topic. It's in very high demand. I know that there's graduates of certain programs across the country who are commanding very, very high wages out of undergraduate programs simply because they've taken a course in data visualization. And it's kind of related to this business intelligence idea of having all of this data, turning it into information, turning it into, using that to help inform decisions. And really what we kind of see with visualization, there's kind of two different ways you can look at it. One, you can use it to measure your performance, especially in real time, which is something called dashboarding. Or you can create certain benchmarks and measure against those benchmarks. A lot of folks who use data visualization do it in almost real time, which is fantastic. NDSU Extension is not a real-time organization. We do not need to have, instantaneous reporting of what's going on within our organization at any particular time. In fact, as specialists, we only report some of our activities, periodically through the year. So that level isn't there, but there's still value in that data, value in that information. And then finally, there's this analytical side, which is saying, okay, we've got all this data. How do we dig into it? How do we turn that into information, understand the system, and then to make those decisions? This is something that was kind of burning in the back of my head. Again, I gave that innovation coffee talk in September, again, just before this came out. And when it was available, I said, you know what, I would really like to do kind of a little demonstration project. And so I pitched the idea of a little bit of funding for hardware, a little bit of funding for a student, and that the student and I would work with the system on extension type projects where we might be using it. We use Tableau, which is the predominant software used in this space. And Tableau is really a fantastic tool. And if you ever want to spend a little bit of time, I'd be happy to kind of demonstrate what it does and how it works. It was designed from the ground up to do data visualization, which is really different than how almost all of us do it. We use Excel to manage data, and then it also makes some charts. And it doesn't do a horrible job, but Excel, if you go back to its origin, it was a spreadsheet. It was there to manage data in a really basic way, to do some basic manipulations. And it's just kind of become the default for clicking a couple of buttons and making charts that kind of work, but really don't allow the user to engage with the data via the visual. And Tableau, on the opposite side, came for exactly that purpose. It's not meant to manage data. It's not meant to conduct rigorous analysis. It's there to say, hey, you as a user, how can you see what's going on in your data, look at it from slightly different angles really, really easily, and communicate whatever you might see to other decision makers or other people who you think might want that capability. Neat thing about Tableau, it's very robust software. It really has a lot of features. It's intended for the private sector. Looking at the private side of things, it's very, very expensive, but it can also be very valuable. And their model is you pay per user, and depending on what type of user you are, you might spend almost $1,000 a year just for the software license. My brother happens to work for a Fortune 500 company and does similar things, and you can see why in the private sector it's worth that, again, because he has access to detailed operational data that he can then pull up through the system and make really easy to understand visuals, dashboards for the business. And so, folks all around the world can kind of see what's going on, maybe click a couple of things on a screen to kind of hone in or look at things a certain way. But again, it's that purpose that this type of software, this type of solution was really designed for. One thing that's really nice is Tableau is free if it's for public use, which is fine. And again, to define public use is that anyone can actually get a public license. It just means that all of your data and everything you create is actually going to be available publicly. And so that's really not a huge barrier in much of the work that I do. The data that I collect, that I want to present, is meant to be seen. That idea of transparency is actually valuable rather than being a hindrance. And of course, if you're a private company, you certainly don't want that. So just talking about the project, again, it was to kind of investigate this use of Tableau. And again, we used that public version of the solution, partially because we had a limited budget, but it really does have all of the features that the full software has. You just have to make it all available. But again, that wasn't a problem. Transparency was part of what we were looking at. There's certainly uses where extension might not want the data and everything to be easily accessible. But in this case, that was to some extent the idea. Some of the things we learned, and so I'm not going to go through some of the tools we developed. We did okay with what we were looking at. We looked at two particular data sets and kind of, thinking about how we could use Tableau to help folks understand what was done. And so we used some of the evaluations from Andy's project, which you might be familiar with. Andy's project is a national program that delivers an educational component to women involved with farming operations. A pretty robust program, multiple modules, multiple evenings, typically multiple speakers. So we were looking at that, and then we were also looking at an egg lenders conference. So we, in Extension Agribusiness, every fall we have a series of meetings across the state. And really the goal for this, as promised, was, hey, let's look at these two programs. We have some evaluation data, and let's see if we can visualize them and see what we've got. And, we honestly didn't get that far. And actually go to probably one of the most important points is you got to keep your data as raw and as unaggregated as possible. And there's this tradition that we have because we've been working with things like Excel, where it's like, no, I'm going to do some of these basic calculations and then share the values that have been calculated with you. And that if you just share that calculated piece, I lose all of the refined, disaggregated pieces. And I really, can't go back and re-engineer those individual pieces. And a lot of times those pieces aren't shared, can't be shared, or lost. And it's really to the detriment of everybody. And again, so for us with Tableau is, if we can have all of those individual pieces, then we can flip and turn and look at this data in many different ways. If it's already been summarized, then we can only, visualize that summary. And again, maybe not be able to have all of those options that we'd have otherwise. And that really goes back to kind of the third point which is that, if Tableau is going to be used, and there's some discussion that we might use it to visualize some of our field trial data from our crop trials across the state. But, if we're going to use it for evaluation reporting, it's got to be part of the entire process and the culture for whoever's going to be involved in the evaluation and the program to understand, how we're going to ask questions and why, which is just good evaluation process, but then how we're going to maintain that data, knowing that we're going to use Tableau to look at it. Because it's really easy to ask that next question or two, which can make the visualization much more impactful. And again, one of the things we actually lost, which was really unfortunate in terms of Annie's project, is our data all went to Iowa State. They did summary analysis, sent back these summary or descriptive statistics, and so much was lost. And to me, it doesn't make any sense. Again, if I could have each of those individual responses the way they were collected, and then let us to do the flipping and the flopping, works a lot better. But again, if that's not part of our culture, if that's not what we do, we'll always kind of lose that opportunity to take better advantage of the data. Going along with that too, though, there is a learning curve. It's pretty intuitive software. Actually, when I was first exposed to Tableau, a colleague of mine who came from the private sector, who's now in our department, was presenting it to the department. I had to leave to take a call, and so missed the rest of his presentation. But that afternoon, it was a Friday afternoon, over the course of about 45 minutes, I had downloaded the software, opened it up, pulled in a data set, done things that would have taken hours in Excel or by hand, and made some really cool visuals that I would never be able to make in Excel. The one caveat to that, though, is that, I've got a lot of experience in programming. I'm a data guy, so I see a lot of things in numbers that a lot of people, normal people, might not. So it's easier for me to ramp up on that learning curve. But, for another extension professional or specialist, especially those who don't work in the quantitative, area, it would be a heck of an ask to do this. I'd say it'd be akin to kind of figuring out Excel and being at least a proficient user of Excel. And it doesn't make sense for all of us to do that. And so, to actually take advantage of the demonstration we had, it's got to be an institutional thing, and it's got to be a deliberate thing, knowing that, it's going to take effort and resources that won't be able to be used otherwise. One of the cool things too, I learned on the fly, and Bob, since you're on the call, you might remember our conversations. I really wanted to get the Tableau visual, which is web-based. The solutions are web-based. I wanted to get that onto the NDSU extension webpage, my particular webpage. And there's a lot of concerns that you can't, bring executables, actual, little applications onto our server, because viruses, hacking, all that stuff can happen. But it was actually really neat to learn that I can just provide the link, embed the link, and yet my visual on my web page is still interactive. It's all done on that public web page that Tableau manages, but I can interact with it real time on my website, which was really neat. That's a neat thing to learn. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today. I do have a couple of Tableau worksheets I can open up and kind of show you how that works if you're interested. Maybe today isn't the time, but just wanted to share with you what we did with these two projects and generally what we learned.
Awesome. Thanks, David. Any questions for David about either project? You can feel free to open up your mic, or if you want to use the chat, if you prefer that, you can do that.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Hans. Could you just give one example quickly what the the output is of that program, because that would help me to kind of know what you're talking about, because
yep, absolutely.
Kind of an abstract.
Yeah, so let me share. I'll share my screen, and this is actually this is something I produced. This is not from the project. This is some export data that I produced, and so this is driven by some government data in terms of export. So I can make all of these visuals. This is not high polished stuff. This is just something I got out there. But what's interesting about this, so each one of these boxes is its own sheet. So it's its own visual. And one of the things you can do within it is that it's connected. And so that I can actually interact with this data. So, I mean, for example, I'm looking at this now, I can see that for China, what the particular value is. And I can actually look down in the lower right-hand corner, I can see the growth and then the decline in Chinese exports. And this is really just kind of a basic presentation of the things you can do. I mean, what's probably most amazing, and I'll flip this over, you guys can see this, is if you look on that right-hand side of your screen, all of those different potential figures, is the ability to make all of these different figures relatively easily. And again, these are kind of the off-the-shelf easy things, and these are not good ones as I'm kind of going through it. But your ability to look at all of this data differently is really kind of where the value is. I'm going to share quick. No, that's not what I wanted to show. No, that's. So this is, if you guys can see, this is a chart. So this is something I built last week. So if you can see, this is the Tableau interface. So this is the actual software, not the web-based presentation. Quickly copied the yield, the trial results from Carrington, Dickinson, and Langdon field trials, and rebuilt this. So the chart that you see, the table that you see, is exactly what we really present. But it's not that tough to go this next step and say, okay, let's look at it a different way. And this is a somewhat a specific way of looking at it. But here we can kind of zoom through all of these by variety. And again, it's not any particular view or visualization. It's these different combinations and ways that we might want to look at them that make it really powerful. And so, and again, one of the points from this, and this is just presenting the raw data, we also don't manipulate it, but we could easily go through and say, okay, what was the average emergence at any of the locations, or the average emergence for any of the varieties, and compare them across variety or across locations, and so on. And again, it's all accommodated very readily by the software. A lot of things you can do to continually, tweak the way in which you're interacting with the data, which is probably the main point. And then the other part is it's really easy to serve up. For this figure to be hosted online, and then for folks to go through and say, gosh, what I'm really interested in is variety X59, which is the kind of the biggest variety. But I can change the way that I look at a lot of these different things. I wouldn't want to do that. But again, that's kind of the idea. Again, to think that, and one of the best ways to do this is actually to have cases and see, okay, how have people in similar situations visualized the data to actually see what the possibilities are. And because you have much easier control of how you create visuals, you're really not stuck like you are in Excel, where it's like, okay, I'm going to make one of these 15 different visuals and that's it. You really have the ability to flip things around and make all sorts of different stuff, which again, depending on what you're doing, can be really, really valuable. And so again, this is kind of a presentation of it. I think what would be most interesting, like on the trial side, is to sit down with the research agronomist and say, okay, we can make this table. Give me your data and we can make this table, and we can serve it up electronically online, so it's not just a PDF. Or what other kind of charts or visuals do we want to create? Or how might we want to look at this stuff differently to kind of to achieve whatever kind of goal or answer whatever kind of questions we think users might have. And again, I haven't taken that step to say, hey, let's look at the average yield, the average emergence, the standard deviation around those values, all of that, which can, be, to me, I think is really interesting. And, you know, that's 5 minutes of looking at it. You know, there's folks who their lives revolve around the software, and they make a lot of money for themselves and for their business, you know, building sheets and then dashboards for their business. So probably not great, Hans, but that's kind of what I've got right now.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that was very helpful. Yeah, Dave, that was very helpful because, you know, it at least gives you an idea of what it can do, just briefly. But yes, I can see some great potential there. Thank you.
You're welcome. And the one thing I'd bring up too, I did share this with Becky Koch last week. I was at part of another meeting, and they've done a series of trials on bioenergy crops. They're thinking about ways that they can share their findings broadly, and they're really looking at using Tableau to do that. I'm like, gosh, that is a great idea. You know, we could do that at NDSU. We've done fantastic trials on all of these crops at different locations for decades, but it is, you know, it's not optimal for everybody, and I do it a lot. You know, I have to go into a PDF and look at it, as opposed to, hey, let's leverage a system that's built for working with data like this in a really easy way. And then especially since it's public, it's free, you know, so we don't have to pay however many thousands of dollars to maintain a system. And this way, you know, farmers could interact with their data, you know, and kind of get involved with some of this stuff kind of as they see fit.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I don't hear any. Julie, would you be willing to tell us a little bit about your innovation grant project?
Sure. All right, can you see my screen?
We can.
All right. So we enacted in 2018 an Extension Food and Nutrition Volunteer Program, and you can see the team members are from all around the state, including Cass, Morton, Nelson, Richland, Sargent, Ward, Williams, and me on campus. And I found this quote because I thought it was kind of an interesting one. It's in the Master Family and Consumer Sciences Volunteer Program, which is actually a national program. There's no greater asset to extension than when a person volunteers his or her own knowledge, skills, time, or resources to assist others to make informed decisions. So I just want to take us back a long ways. You can see that picture up on the right. It's from about 1920. Based on the furniture style. I'm an antique person. Back in the day, home demonstration agents in the early years of Extension showed canning clubs how to preserve food. So it's not a new concept. And in fact, it's one that has come a lot into fashion again, I guess I'd say, in the last few years. And there are several states that either have developed their own volunteer program for FCS or FCW, or they have used the national program. So what I did to start this effort was actually to download all of those volunteer programs and compare them. It was a bit daunting when I downloaded whole binders full of information. So I presented that to the group, and we made those resources available, but we kind of went off on our own thing. So going back historically, the idea back in the 20s and before was for participants to learn and then to share or extend this information to others in the community. And that was kind of also the idea behind 4-H, because a lot of the early youth development work meant that the youth would learn in clubs and take those innovations home. So that's the whole concept of the diffusion of innovations of extension. So in the end, volunteering has value for extension, for communities, and also for the volunteers. And as a long-term volunteer for 4-H, I can recognize those values myself, as I'm sure many of you have done. So currently across the United States in FCS, there are a lot of volunteer activities, everything from rural vitality to financial capability. Nutrition and health is what I'm going to talk about, home safety and energy, child and family resiliency, and also disaster preparedness. And my predecessor, Pat, many years ago, used to have a master food preservation volunteer program. We have not done that because one of the issues with volunteer programs is the amount of time and energy that they do require. So we decided, we looked at what happened in the past, we looked at the resources we have, and we decided on a little different path where we use the lessons nationally and also from the state, and maybe a little bit also from 4-H. So our goal was to reach more people, because at the time we put this forth, we had a lot of vacancies all across the state in the FCS, FCW area. So we wanted to use our evidence-based programs, and of course we were piloting a Train the Trainer program to provide support all across North Dakota. So here is the process we used. Our little group met using Zoom, just as we are now, pretty handy. And we created a process, and we also developed any new materials that needed to be developed. Probably the most challenging part, where we learned the most, was in how to identify the volunteers. We thought it would be easier than it actually turned out to be. So we looked for retired teachers, retired extension agents, currently working public health, because technically we're not paying them, so they were volunteers to us. And we also integrated many students into these programs. Our challenge, especially in Western North Dakota, was that many jobs that pay very well are available. And also they're looking for people to go into schools and substitutes, so they could make a lot of money. But we were able to be successful and find a number of volunteers, and I'll tell you the numbers we found. So we provided volunteer training on an individual basis. I recorded on Zoom all of the training that we do for the different curricula that I'll show you. And we also gave them all access to a Google Drive folder. Now, not all of them were totally comfortable with the technology that we use, so it did take some effort from our extension agents, and a lot of it was really, sitting down with those volunteers and walking them through. So we had this parking lot on the Google Drive with all these resources. We also did a Facebook closed group. I think that has a lot of potential, but again, technology isn't something that everybody loves. We provided them with background information about extension, even though most of them were familiar. The curricula being used, we provided them with everything they would need to go into classrooms, like all the handouts, the lessons with the script. And as I mentioned, we had a training module for each of the curricula. And I tried to keep those within a reasonable time, because there's only so long that you can listen to a recorded module. So most of those were short. So this is the curricula that we used. We could have used, as I said, any of those national curriculum pieces, but that would not have really met our goal, because we were trying to meet the needs for our current signature programs and pilot programs and extension that are part of our work plan. So as many of you may be familiar, we have several On the Move to Better Health programs. Each of these has 5 or 6 lessons, and they're for grades kindergarten or first. Usually it's used in first grade, second grade, 4th, and 5th. They're all different, but they all have a similar little on the move character. And most of the lessons last about 40 minutes, and we also provide some additional lessons and resources for teachers. In fact, we just provided Jeopardy-like games for the teachers to use as reviews in between times when we're there. Our curricula are delivered once a week, so we go on a Tuesday and then the next Tuesday and on down the line, as long as the weather agrees, which it doesn't always in our state. So that's On the Move. So many of our volunteers were very comfortable teaching children, so that's what they chose to do. So they got to choose. And we asked them to do 1 or 2 curricula at the most. I hope that you're all familiar with Healthwise for Guys and Healthwise for Women. These are individual lessons on the topics listed, including skin cancer, colon cancer, prostate cancer for men. And again, try to make it as easy as possible. So all the supplies, the handouts, the scripts, everything is in a toolkit along with any props. They could set up a display. All they have to do is unpack the box, hopefully review all the script before they do it. And they all have PowerPoints and other resources. Because of the popularity of Healthwise for Guys, we also developed Healthwise for Women. And similar topics, we added one on called Finding the Truth, which is about identifying reputable information because we have so much information coming at us, and choosing a healthy diet, which is technically a bingo game. So they're fun. I just talked to some students down the hall in a class, and I was telling them about extension and how people who attend extension programs usually don't have to be there unless it's a certification program, for example, so that we do have to make it fun and user-friendly. And as Dave said, it's always good to provide food. And we're also doing food lessons, so people like to learn about food. So in the end, we were able in this first year, or the year we did this, to reach 68 volunteers, and they directly impacted over 3,400 people. And when we added up the value of their time, and the current rate is $25.43, that was over 10,350 to be exact. So we doubled our money essentially in terms of the grant. And I showed you some pictures on this slide. These are some of the children in the On the Move to Better Health Kids Cooking School, where the kids learn, and this is actually a 12-hour program, so they come 3 or 4 times for 3 or 4 hours. So we wanted to know if these volunteers got anything out of this, because we weren't paying them. We might have given them a name tag or, you know, some little thing, a calendar or something that we have, cookbook. And you can see that on a 5-point scale, they found that they actually were improving skills or honing skills. I improved my skills delivering lessons, 4.7. I believe my participants learned something new, 4.6. I feel more confident speaking in front of groups now, 4.5. I enjoyed the experience, 4.3, and I believe I made a difference in my participants' lives, 4.3. So all of them agreed or strongly agreed in these statements. So this gave us encouragement to continue to do this. So we are continuing. We have all the pieces, and I think it's a really successful model to look at, you know, maybe engaging some of our folks that still want to stay active in retirement or post-teaching or just doing something for their community. So with that, I will answer any questions you might have for me.
Thanks, Julie. Go ahead and open your microphone if you have a question, or use the chat if you're more comfortable with that.
And I can't see the chat, Bob, so you'll have to tell me any questions.
Yeah, I'll let you know if a question comes in.
Everyone's
I'm not seeing any questions. Last call for questions.
Julie, this is Lynette. Hi, thanks for this. Do you think there's any other programs that we'd be able to do this with that you can think of, or is this kind of, you know, look, think about the food nutrition side. Is this was a good pilot? It really was a good model to showcase this. Do you think there's anything else, or do we need to kind of limit that? Just your thoughts.
I think we have to look at the specific topics that we're covering. We don't want people to go beyond, you know, get into clinical nutrition or something like that in the area of food and nutrition. Right. But of course, we always have been using this sort of model when we used to do the community outreach, you know, the homemaker clubs. Mm-hmm. So any of those sorts of lessons, like one I think of that would be good to use this with would be, we have the Germans from Russia, and now my current student is working on a exploring food culture Scandinavian foods and looking at what they actually eat in Scandinavia and the fact that the Nordic diet is one of the healthiest diets in the world. So I think those sorts of food-related programs are good ones to use.
Mm-hmm. Good. I keep thinking about, you know, this program be in the school that, you know, you described too, and how young parents that kind of want to maybe see their kids during the day or would be great volunteers. I don't know if that's who a lot of them were, but I think about those that might not be working outside the home, but this was a nice opportunity to get in and work with the children in their kids' class. I don't know if that's what you saw. What age group were the volunteers?
Well, some of them were actually our college students, which were volunteers, and they could also be from clubs, you know, like college clubs. So they were young.
Okay.
But I think that would be a real good idea on the young parents.
Yeah.
But it would take some training because, you know, not everybody knows the lessons. I mean, it is scripted, but
right.
Sometimes we have to watch what people go off script.
Yeah. No, that's good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions for Julie or for Dave? Okay, well, I really want to thank Julie and Dave for taking the time today. Awesome work that they've been doing. Oh, go ahead, jump in.
Lynette, one of my volunteers was one of our 4-H parents who had young kids at the school.
Okay, cool. Yeah. I keep thinking about my daughter-in-law who I think would just jump on this. She's all about health and nutrition, and I know she'd love to be there with her kids in the school. She lives in the city, so it's a different, you know, state and everything, but I just keep thinking about, oh, that would be a good audience to do this, you know, to be our volunteer. I like that.
PTAs, yeah, but definitely it would be a good place to reach them. But it was out in the West where everybody wanted to make money, so.
Sure. Well, thanks. This is good.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks again to Julie and Dave, and thanks everyone for tuning in today. The recording will be on the website, ag.ndsu.edu/innovation. You can find most of the innovation coffee breaks, previous coffee breaks out there as well. If you missed last week's with the other Innovation Fund programs being discussed, you can check that out there as well. Thanks again, everybody. Have an awesome day.